Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. And today, Julian and I are going to go head to head. We're traversing an island in the middle of nowhere. Who will survive the Battle Royale? That's right, we're covering.
Yeah, well, my bag had the machine gun in it because I'm an American, so of course it would.
Being British, I got a teapot. And I'm quite happy with that. Yes, we are covering 2000's Battle Royale, the story of a class of students that are selected and taken to a deserted island and put to test, I suppose, into a game of survival. There are, I think it's like 30 or 40 of them, and they have 3 or so. They have as many days as possible to survive.
I think in this version, there's low 40s.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the poster. It's 42 on the poster, it says. And they have several days to survive, and only one can be standing at the end of the game. If there are more, they have these collars on that will be activated, and they'll all be killed. All of this coming from the Battle Royale Act, initiated by the government. For what purpose, I'm slightly unsure. But yeah, let's get into this then, Battle Royale. So, Julian, what are your initial thoughts on Battle Royale?
It takes a little bit to get going, but it's a little punchy. At the start, a little sort of tooting its own horn. It wants to kind of explain. I have read the novel. I have read the entire 14-volume manga of this. I am a big Battle Royale fan, and I am amazed. We may disagree on this, but I am amazed how well this movie works from start to finish. I'm astounded by how deep and meaningful it is. I think it blows me away, so to speak. And what I'm amazed by is it doesn't hold itself in its memory that way. I think it's so easy to dismiss as because this has been imitated so much. I love Squid Game. We've all seen the Hunger Games. That she said that was not influenced by this, but
yeah, right.
This is its own genre now, right?
Yes.
And it is the Battle Royale genre. This started its own subgenre, and that is what
this started it. But we've already covered the Running Man, which individuals thrown into an arena to fight stuff. But you're right. This is what
that's true. There are precedents, but this is the solidification into its own genre thing. And you can easily see how you could take this movie and just go there was that Youngblood series, that was doing this, right? You can take this and adapt it into anything, and you're I get to watch 42 young Japanese characters die creatively. That's awesome. I can come up with creative ways to kill them. It writes itself. And I think it has written itself and appealed to writers so much that, you just see so much potential here.
I think the reason that you're right, and I'll get to a bit of an overview thought on this, but I think you're right because for 2 reasons. One of the things that this does is it limits the locations because it's very contained. It's on an island, and so you go, cool, we can do this wherever we want on this island. We haven't got to worry about sets. It works on that way. As you say, you can be creative because you can go off and do all kinds of different things. Before I watched this, actually, this is quite interesting. I thought the same. I was like, we watched The Running Man, which I do think does precede this, and the film is closer to this idea and concept than the book is. The book is very, very different. but I went and watched some of the things that this inspired. So
mm-hmm.
I went and watched the whole franchise of the Hunger Games, all 4 films. I started with 1 and thought, well, they're on Prime. I should probably watch all of them. I'm, glad I've done it. Never going to do it again. It's fine. I also watched one called The Condemned, which stars Stone Cold Steve Austin, which came out in 2005, which is a bunch of criminals on death row are all put onto an island and do the same thing. It's got Vinnie Jones in and Danny Trejo and a few others. So it's got those typical things. It's quite good fun. So coming into this, I was like, okay, as you said, this is the solidification. This is the film that sort of instigated this idea of isolation and this other stuff. And we've had many since. I really struggled with this film. Not because of the idea, and I think, but and in many cases, not because the thing I struggled with is twofold. I don't think and I don't want to praise the Hunger Games overly, because I think those films are a bit of a mess in and of themselves. Clearly take a lot from this. But one of the things I'm curious in this film is this film doesn't seem to have its own history set up for itself. Like the kids in the film don't seem to know about Battle Royale as a thing. So what's the point of this? That there's no rumor of kids going missing or being punished. The timeline's weird. So the film opens with some kid cutting the back of the teacher's leg, who becomes sort of the leader of the program, as they call it. And at the end, it's mentioned that was 2 years before the events on the island.
I think that's clear from early on.
Yeah, I sort of got that. And I'm like, okay, so that's a weird time frame to be setting that up. And then
but I think that the Hunger Games Act, right? And I don't think that this is that meaningful, but I mean, the Hunger Games Act would have preceded him being attacked and cut by that student.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's good. Right. The Battle Royale Act sort of existed, but the kids don't seem to know about this because the film starts with them having a victor, and it's one of my favorite scenes. Is there's a girl come off and she's like, here's the victor of this program, and the press are all there, and she's sort of like, it's this young girl covered in blood and all this other stuff, and she grins at the camera, and they're like, she's smiling, and it's like, oh my god. And I'm thinking, oh, is this going to explore this killing of how this little girl was forced to become a psychopath, or was forced into some traumatic event? Never mentioned again, so I'm fine with that. It's a past event to sort of frame it, but the press are there, so how does the kids not know about this?
Yeah,
and then you get 2 former winners being introduced into the or survivors being introduced, and it all seems a bit like, so if the kids don't know about it, how does the Battle Royale act as a piece of legislation?
No, I mean, it's all of this is kind of stupid.
Is it in the novel? Is it covered in the novel or the manga? Like,
yes. I
assumed it was.
In those, it is pretty clear that everybody knows about this. And there might be some time where some kid goes like, oh yeah, they kind of explain it, but it's clear that it's being explained for the audience, right? It's not really like, golly gee, I don't remember these Jedis no more, Instead, it's much more like, yeah, there's some kid who's unclear, or they're presenting it for the audience to make clear how they have the legal authority to do this. But I think, and I think similar to Running Man, like, it doesn't really matter.
No.
I mean, like, there's no, for me, it doesn't really matter. I think that this adaptation makes a mistake in trying to give too much explanation for that. And because it front loads that, I was worried about exactly this, that because it front loads that, you might think, oh,
this is important,
painting a fuller picture. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like, what's going to happen is going to be an outgrowth of these things you set up. No, I mean, it's like when we did, was it Outland? No, there's no coherent, really, worldview. Yeah. There's just a mining asteroid, right? A mining planet. I mean, that's all you need to know.
That's true, because I agree. Once it kicks off, like, once the kids are once they're in the classroom, and the teacher's there, and it's sort of like the soldiers are there, and he's explaining it, and he sort of gives the demonstration of what the collars do and stuff. Like, it kicks off with a bang, and you're like, oh shit, like this is off. Okay, they're going, and then they're forced to run off, and I'm like, okay, I'm down with this, and it sort of goes from there, and everything from that point works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the visuals in this are great. Like, there's some really good ideas for visuals. However, there are also some shockingly bad shot scenes, to the extent where I'm like, how is it they have a cinematographer that's picked this scene by the ocean that's got this setup and this lighting, and it's framed the characters in this way and it's great, to having this utter garbage of people rolling around in a hedge, which I could shoot in my back garden, that it looks awful. And it's so sort of bizarre. And that is also topped off again by some of the cast, where there's some of the cast that I'm going, you're good, you're natural, I'm sort of digging what you're doing, to others that are just, again, dreadful. Like some of the child actors or the teen actors in this. And I think this is actually more of a Japanese cultural thing from an acting perspective. It sometimes feels a little bit stage performance. Do you know what I mean? It's very sort of like big and hand movements and sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it's very jerky. And
it's like the manga, the anime
kind of thing. Yeah. And so there are scenes. I'll give you an example of it. So, just to go to weave through it, there's a scene in which Nanahara has been rescued, and he's all banged up, and it's that sort of like the kitchen. The girl's like, "I'm so glad you're saved. We're about to have lunch." And I'm just like, and she's giggling, and I'm like, "You're an awful actress. Like, you are terrible." And then she goes into that room of girls, and that whole scene with those girls that having the lunch, and the girlie with the poison I stopped it at the end, and I was just like, I can't believe how bad some of that was framed and set up and acted. Like, she jumps on the table and they're shooting, and then all of a sudden she just sort of like just jumps to fall down and all this other stuff. And I'm just like,
there are a couple of shots like that, yeah, especially with the bullets. You're right, where you're like, yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying. And so it looks like, oh, that's some splash paint, and
it's not so much
is like, no, you just got shot, and they did just get shot, but it wasn't as fatal as it should have been, or from that close. And there are issues with that,
and it just feels messy in that sense, to then have a scene at the end when you have the two survivors, the former survivors, the psychopath in the sort of dark school uniform, and then the guy who survived, who was sort of taking revenge for Kikyo or whatever. One of them's blinded and he's got like blood coming from his eyes with the machine gun. But however, because it's all got the fire behind it and he's got the machine gun, I'm actually digging that more, because I am going like, oh, this feels like an anime. You've got the flames and he's blind and he's all. I'm like, cool, you've gone all out. You've gone the full John Woo here. Like, I'm expecting doves to fly past and shit. Like, I'm fine with that. But then I'm like, so why have you done this here? But then somewhere else it feels, again, so stilted and so weird. And it I don't know, it just felt inconsistent for me.
No, I think that's true. I mean, I'm less bothered by those things. I know that this is, a Japanese film that doesn't have a Hollywood budget, and I'm amazed by what it is able to do. There are shots that are amazing, where it's like, you blew your money here. I'm more bothered by, like, there are a few just terrible day for night shots. I am always irritated by day for night when it does not look right, where it looks like, oh, you just put a blue tint on things.
Yeah.
I'm really irritated by that for some reason. But and I'm also bothered by shots of like people on cliffs where they're clearly not in the scene or something, or where somebody jumps and then you just cut and show the bodies or something. That kind of thing bothers me more than like the example that you're citing of in the lighthouse, the gunplay. Although I do notice it does irritate me. But I think that scene works so well for me. I'm probably tearing up at the end of that, and that's probably one of like 15 times where I'm like deeply moved by it, that by this movie, that for me it's like, yeah, okay, there's a sketchiness, there's an Ed Wood quality to some of the shots in there, but I get what you're doing, and the message you're conveying is fucking devastating.
I agree with that. I agree with that. That the way one of the things that hits home for me, and so I was sat watching it, and one of the things that kept coming through is like, these are kids. And in often the case, so to make a comparison to, say, the Hunger Games, the Katniss Everdeen is supposed to be like 15, 16 years old when that first film takes place. Jennifer Lawrence could be, I don't know what the hell she is when she was playing it, but like, she's clearly not 16. And the film also forgets that she's a teenager. So when you have all the sort of the love interest stuff and the triangle, it feels like a bunch of 20-year-olds talking about it, and you're going like, yeah. This film feels like mid-teens, having crushes, mixed emotions about each other, and the petty sort of jealousies and all that sort of stuff. Oh, all that sort of like hit home when they're like, you get two of the girls together, and they're like, oh, one's like, you're a bitch, and you took my boyfriend away, and all this other stuff, and like they're about to kill each other. I'm like, yeah, no, this could happen in a playground or behind the bike sheds in any school at any time, like this argument. So all that kind of works. And so when they do end up, when it has those bursts of violence, and there's a couple in particular that really stand out, that they are shocking, not because of the level of violence, which I think we've almost become a little bit like, we often think of ourselves as being accustomed to that kind of thing, or sort of like numb to that level of violence. As we've seen, when we get to like Tokyo Gore Police, I'm pretty sure it'll be violence can be seen as almost like a comedy effect. But there are two scenes in this that really sort of like made me sort of stop. One of them is the girl in the yellow tracksuit. She's training, and then the lad with the bow, the crossbow comes, and he's sort of like, "No, you're going to be mine," all this other stuff. And she's like, "No," but she even stops, and she's like, "Oh my God, are we having this conversation?" Like, And when she attacks him, like, she doesn't just attack him; she attacks his crotch, like, repeatedly.
Oh no, yeah, that's multiple stab wounds to the dick and balls, right?
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, like this film is, really sort of, this idea of being stalked and creepy and all this other stuff. Like, she's going like, no, I've had enough, and this is like, if I'm going to take you out, this is how it's going to happen. And there's a couple of scenes like that where I'm just like, oh wow, that's really powerful. It's not a woman, or it's not a girl just attacking a boy and it being, for the shock of the violence. You're adding context as to why that violence is shocking.
Yeah, no, I agree, and and you can see it in multiple ways. I mean, obviously, that's a retaliation for this kind of creepy stalking behavior, right?
But she's told him several times to basically leave her alone. Yeah.
I mean, this movie is 23 years old at this point, and we're still having these conversations.
Yeah.
And here, 23 years ago, is a high school girl in Japan, no less, more conservative about this stuff than us, that has had enough. And in the context of do what you want on this island, decides she and having already been cut is like, oh no, game's on. F you and your dick.
Yeah. And I think, you do get a bit of that. And so I do like some of that. And I feel the budget in some of these things, going back to that scene of all the girls being hidden away and having lunch and all that kind of stuff, sort of, I don't think that scene works barely at all. But the girl who has got the poison, and when that all goes wrong and stuff, like that bit is... it feels almost like Tarantino-esque, where they all start to...
Tarantino praised this movie. And said,
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he does. I mean,
it does feel very Tarantino.
That thing of like they all turn on each other all of a sudden, and you can't... The paranoia of it is the bit that works for me. So that's good.
Well, I think that's the point of the scene. And for me, I leave that scene and, it's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of gunplay for a small amount of wounds, and those wounds are clearly dashes of paint. But everyone's dead, and the sort of like Tarantino-esque quality of that, of like everyone's dead. The guy who's in prison just saw, that they just saw them. His love interest. She's dead. They're all dead. They did this thing of trusting each other and trying to, have this little utopian kind of community there that didn't play the game, and they're all dead, and all because this one person couldn't trust. There are these lines like, we were so stupid, where I think, yeah, I mean, this is humanity, right? This is, we're not good at trusting, and we fuck shit up because we just couldn't follow through. It is prisoner's dilemma, right? Like, this is a million times better than the ending of Batman Begins with the prisoner's dilemma on the ships, right? That doesn't work at all. Where it's like, but there it's like everybody trusts each other and they really work it out, right? No, that's not reality.
Yes.
Here you see in like 3 minutes a much better version of that. And you say like none of that works. I don't disagree with you about most of that criticism, but I would say like the other thing to notice is like that is like a 3-minute segment that could have been like in like Inglourious Bastards, like a 25 minutes, amazing sequence. But this is like a 3-minute segment in a movie that is like so fast paced. It kills like 42 people. All of whom have like their own story and their own creative thing that means something else, So I mean, it's so fast. In fact, that's one of my potential objections.
That's one of the things I'll say is making those comparisons to some of these other films and stuff I watched. Even if you're to take a similar film to, like, let's say Reservoir Dogs, which I think would be a suitable comparison, is that limitation of characters, that sort of bringing the numbers down. Even in like the Hunger Games, they sort of like, right, there's 12 districts, 2 people from each district, that's 24 people, but we're only going to focus on these. And within the first 5 minutes of the games, 10 of them have been killed, and you don't need to worry about them. Here's the ones to worry about, or here's the ones to follow. And the same with like The Condemned I watched with Steve Austin. It's like, here's 10 people, and 2 of those get killed off in the first 2 minutes of fighting. So you've only got 8, and then you can follow those. When this starts, like, and again, I hold my hands up to say, I watched the subtitled version because, and this I'm trying to sort of, because I was in Japanese, so I'm watching the subtitles and I'm reading the subtitles, and some of this is very fast. So there were a couple of scenes I had to sort of quickly flat back and follow the subtitles. They're all wearing the same school uniform to begin with, so a lot of the lads have all got very similar haircuts and stuff. Like, so I'm trying to follow the names, and there's so many of them that after a while I was just like, I'm going to wait till most of them are dead, and then I'm going to start following, like,
figure out who to care about.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who, and that's what, so at the end, when I'm like,
that's true.
Oh, I'm following Nanahara and Nakagawa. I'm like, oh, them 2. I've got it. Right, cool. Forget everybody else.
No, this is true. This is true. In the manga and the book, if I recall correctly, there are even more people. Right. There are even more characters. And, I know I have the same issue. Some are more memorable than others.
Yeah.
But then I'll like even confuse those sometimes, where I'll be like, I have face blindness, but also like we're white. And, I live in Hawaii, but still, there is the we don't want to be the white guys going like, but they all look alike, right? I mean, that's what we're going around.
But if I was to say, if you were to say this with a bunch of white people, all in the same uniform with black hair, I'd have exactly the same problem. Yeah, I would exactly the same problem. This is the problem with boy bands.
Like, oh, that's the cheerleader character.
Yeah, exactly.
Except they've got 3 cheerleaders because it's or cheerleading squad, because it's a whole class. I mean, yeah. So I'll remember like, oh, that's the sensitive outsider, and I'll be like, oh yeah, like reading the manga. Where I would read it as it came out in U.S. translation. And I would be like, oh, that's that sensitive kid. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, wait a minute. There are 2 of those, and we're following both of them. So, no, I mean, that's true. But also the flip side of it is that it lets you get more deaths, and it lets you tell more stories. So telling more stories is a problem because it's hard to keep them separate. But it also lets you kill a lot of characters and tell a lot of different stories. And that is to me, like, I want them to have more, not less. Like, I do think this is clogged at 2 hours. This needs to be, like an HBO limited series.
Yeah.
But which I would adore, but with that kind of budget. But I do love the giant cast and being able to just kill these characters. I mean, there's so many times where, that's entertaining, right? Let's be honest, it's entertaining. There's a Schadenfreude of killing, high school kids who are still young and in their prime. That's part of why Romeo and Juliet is tragic. Is they're young and they have their whole lives ahead of them. I mean, this is prime entertainment stuff, but also their stories matter to me somehow. And I don't know. I like the big cast. I like what they're able to do with these, just killing a character where it manages to still be shocking, even though there are 30 people left.
It's less successful for me. Where I am, I'm like, yeah, okay. I struggle to follow some of the stories. I learn not to care about some, so I'm waiting for the more impactful scenes where, like, the scenes are almost like a vignette within themselves, where I'm going to get the information to tell me why the death is important. And there are several that are very, very good at doing that. And they do differentiate a couple of characters. As I said, they give you the girl in the yellow tracksuit. There's another girl that ditches her school uniform and wears like some denim shorts and a t-shirt, and say, okay, so when she comes about, I recognize her. There's a few things like that where I'm like, okay, you feel like you're important because they've made you stand out a little bit more, so I'm going to follow you. Doesn't always pay off. Doesn't always mean a great deal. But yeah, it's fine following the kids, and some of the deaths are good. There is that thing of, because there are so many stories, and they're like, there's those kids in the warehouse that have got the generator, and they're he's got his laptop up and running, and they hack into the system, and he's making bombs and all this other stuff.
They straight up have a plan. So I was going to bring them up vis-a-vis what you were talking about. That, like, this is a group of characters who straight up have a plan to attack and take out the adults and the military people who are running this battle royale. It is a good plan. Yeah. And it's the reason why I don't mind really the hacking stuff, right? Because I always hate that stuff when that's thrown in, Yeah. But I don't mind it because it's like, oh, these are those characters, right? In any Hollywood movie, those guys win. And that's the end of the movie, right? The Steven Spielberg version of this is
they are the main characters. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're set up to be some of the main characters. When they're ready, everything's working. When they're ready to attack, and you can see how Tarantino would like this because he does some of the same stuff. I mean, it just pulls the narrative rug out from underneath you. The characters who are set up to be the main characters are brutally cut down and just murdered in front of you. And for me, it does that over and over and over again in a way that I really dig, and I think it's more realistic. I mean, you have a sense that one of the things I most hate about combat and stuff in movies is the sort of like Jason Bourne thing of like, well, this guy was always going to win no matter what. No. Real reality is I don't know what weapons are going to be around me. Luck has as much to do with it. If I hadn't slipped, I wouldn't have died, and the best person in the world can still slip. I mean, that kind of thing. And this captures that sense.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I do agree that one of the things that's interesting about this is there is no hero narrative. Like, there is no... You get characters that are presented, as you say, multiple suspects, are set up to be the hero or the and as I say, they're cut down, and you're never entirely sure. Even like the what's his name, Kawada, the guy that sort of has been a previous survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Even they repeatedly sort of give you different aspects of his narrative that you're like, is he or is he not a good guy? So I like the fact they keep you are kept guessing, which was but that was also part of my problem because, as you know, I like a nice narrative. I like things to be a bit I like the bit where they do kill off all the sort of the hacker people. However, that stuff's then never come back to and never used feels a bit like, oh shit, I invested in that, and then you've just thrown it away. So I almost feel like I like the point of doing it, but the fact it never gets utilized anyway feels like a waste, where I'm just like, oh, well, no. It almost tells you, one of the things I think that, it almost tells you not to invest in people in this thing. Do you know what I mean? Where I'm like, oh, so I don't invest in anybody because they could all die, and I'm like, all right, I won't.
Good, I like that.
But I need that. I need that for something to cling to.
Yeah, but I mean, first of all, like I like that. Like it's, I would say like you don't see the system being rebooted. Actually, you just see it back up. That to me is a flaw, but I like that plant came to nothing. Now, I mean, you could imagine a scenario in which that's why they're able to take the collars off at the end. And I do think there's so much that's lost for time here. You constantly feel like, oh yeah, there's a scene of them rebooting. There's a scene of them figuring out those colors in a flashback once it's revealed. There's stuff like that just, this is already over 2 hours, and it's like just a roller coaster ride for me. I mean, it's just like full pedal to the metal for 2 hours. I mean, forget, like, seriously, like Fury Road is like a slow crawl on a Disney, kids to line. And this is the roller coaster. But I mean, I like that. I know what you're saying. Like, I do have trouble with that compression, but I also sort of feel that, like, if I feel like with most movies, why should I care about any of these characters? And I see, like, here I get a 30-second flashback, and I'm like, oh, he was bullied. That really sucks, right? I care a little bit about him. In a Hollywood movie, I would get, a 12-minute flashback. And after minute 1, I would say, I get what you're doing. He was bullied and I'm supposed to care about him. Shut the hell up and get on with your stupid movie, because it's a dumb movie.
But it's not that. And this is the thing when you get an abundance of cash, you need flashbacks. I would rather have some of these relationships set up before the action starts. Do you know what I mean? Like, you need that piece before it all starts, so you can go, this is this person. And as you said, like, and again, I think I have been spoiled by Western tropes and archetype characters. As you've said, like, this is the jock, this is the nerd, this is the cheerleader. Like, all that is there, to the extent that we've even parodied it in films like Cabin in the Woods. And this film doesn't give you that. And so I appreciate that to an extent. I like that as an alternative. But I get to the end, and you do end up with Nanahara and Nakagawa, and I'm a bit like, all right, yeah. And so,
I mean, I like that. I mean, first of all, I agree that it's hard balancing like those flashbacks, right?
Yeah.
And who those characters are. In fact, that's one of the things that I think never worked about the manga, and to a lesser extent the novel. I think that works better here. I would get to a flashback session, I'd be like, oh my god, I just like get on to teenagers murdering each other, right? Like, but I mean, like that's the meat, right? That's dangled for me that I go for, right? And I'm like, okay, but then I will wind up caring about the characters and how they, in their deaths, I will care about them, and I will care about what it means, right? The fact that, like, so for me, the flashbacks actually work better here because they're so short. But I know what you're saying. Like, the characters are disposable. Like, it's hard to really invest. That's true. The fact that, like, you don't really know who are the main characters. I mean, there are a few, like those exchange students are going to be important, right?
Yeah.
There's certain things, but isn't that reality, right? Like, if you dropped a bunch of contestants, you don't really know who are the main guys, and that's, I watched a Japanese game show recently that's Run for the Money, where they all run around and the guys intercept them. And it's a big hit in Japan. And Netflix has done their version of it. It's a spin-offs in Japan. But and it's crazy, and it's the same kind of thing. Like, you're caught by one of these runners, you're eliminated, and you don't know who to root for, right? And you see this character, they are introduced, like, you spend time with them, they're like, I really need this money, it's for my dying mom, and then they're eliminated, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the thing that happens.
I get that, and I do like that, and I said I like to an extent, I like the randomness. But I think in a way this film wants to have its cake and eat it, in that sense, because you either get the randomness and no one lives, in which case the system wins. I mean, that's what this should be, shouldn't it? Is the system wins. This isn't the Hunger Games where it inspires a revolt and they all it brings the system down. This should be just more of a. There should be. I like the ending where the teacher gets done in and stuff, but like, it should be less of a big issue. And so you want that randomness of almost like a Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction, where it doesn't end up well. And you can maintain that randomness then, and that's fine. Or, and I'm thinking about Nanahara in particular, you get more about, he sees his father's suicide, and you get more about that and all this other stuff. Or you dig into that where you're like, him winning is important. And so him seeing this as being, as surviving is him going for it, and him sort of going off that decision or something, otherwise, seeing that his dad's committing suicide, his dad's suicide repeatedly, I'm a bit like, all right, again, like, I get it, but it never sort of it doesn't inspire the act that I think it feels like it should do. I know it ends up with him protecting people in the end, but I don't know, it just feels a bit. They want to have that randomness, but they also want to introduce that heart-tugging kind of thing at times, and I'm like, okay, we choose one or the other.
Well, I would disagree. I mean, I think that the heart-tugging stuff, the key thing is that it's kept to a minimum, right? I know somebody who found his mother hung. I see the shit, and I just, I think about my friend, and I know how that affects somebody lifelong. And yeah, it's just like a kind of shorthand. I mean, that's the thing about this movie, is that because, for better or worse, because of its runtime, that gets maybe, 15 seconds, and then it gets repeated for 5 and 5 here. And so it gets repeated, and it becomes kind of a shorthand for that guy's trauma, and, and then this idea of you can do it, what did this dying message mean? There's a kind of mysticism to that I don't like, but because it's such shorthand, I'm not spending 10 minutes in this flashback where I'm supposed to care about what food he ate and the last conversation that he had with, so-and-so, and all these details that I just can't stand. I mean, that's all the stuff that we've talked about, disaster movies, just fast forward it for 30 minutes, get to the earthquake, I don't care about the characters. And this movie knows that I don't care about the characters and was made for me. See, that's
the thing. I think, and I can see that what you're saying. But I think I needed more. And so when I am given it, I'm a little bit like, no, fuck you. You're not trying to do one thing and the other. I don't.
No, you've denied me an emotional over and over and over. You don't get to tug at my heartstrings now.
That's
buddy.
right. Yeah, exactly. I get sort of I go to that high school place of no, screw you. Get petulant about it. But yeah, so I see what you're saying, and because there are some bits I do like, and I'll go back to that randomness. Some of the killings, I like the fact that an accident early on where he gets the axe buried in his head becomes that sort of comes back as a thing later on. There's the girl with the scythe, how she sort of there's just that randomness of some of the deaths, and there's several occasions.
She's really memorable in the manga, by the way. Like
Oh
she
shit.
is.
Yeah.
Oh no, and she like seduces people. Like I mean, she's just like the femme noir.
Well, that's shown, or it's sort of suggested in this, isn't it? Because like at one point it cuts to her sort of leaving, and there's these two naked like guys have been mutilated, like proper butchered, and she's just sort of like skipping away, and you're like, oh, you have done a thing here. So this is what I'm saying. Like, I can see that the manga would be a lot more interesting. I can see it could expand. Or I say HBO Max series would be amazing of this to expand that and that violence and some of that stuff. But some of those characters do stand out, and I do like some of the randomness of like moments being cut off. Again, like the end, there's that guy who's got the tracker. He's got like the tracker as his weapon, and he tracks down that girl, and she shoots him, and he's like, I just wanted to see you. You're so pretty. I've always been attracted to. And then, I love you. And she's like, but you never said anything. You never said anything. And then she gets up and just bang, she's shot. And you're just like, oh, all right.
Oh my God. No, I mean, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that scene. And
that's one of the ones where it works for me again, because it's set up well. I think it's photographed really well. It looks good. And that's one of the ones that does work for me. But then it sort of followed, unfortunately, by another sort of scene of it being a complete botched job, where they have like a fight between her and the crazy one with the machine gun, and it feels like it's badly choreographed. It feels sort of like there's a scene, and having been, and this sounds bit inside baseball. Having been a former wrestler and knowing sort of just seeing how this sort of when you choreograph a fight, there's a fraction of a second where she has her hand out, like he's done something, and she puts her arm out, and it's like she's waiting for him to take it for the next bit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that looks messy. You could have edited around that sort of thing. And there's a bit of that, and then she's one of those ones, as you said, like she gets shot like multiple times and gets up and gets up and gets up. And I'm like, you've literally just had a scene where you've shot someone twice in the chest and they die, and now you're getting shot like 7 times and getting up repeatedly. It's like, that sort of thing bothers me a bit. But
I mean, there's more of that in like supposedly realistic movies, like the Jason Bourne movies, and I mean, every Arnie and I mean, these movies are filled with characters who get shot, and then I mean, Bruce Willis in Die Hard. I mean, I'll give the first one a pass, but I mean, I see that and object to that. I do object to that here, but again, because of the time, it's kind of like, oh yeah, you got shot 10 seconds ago, and it's low budget, and like, they could have communicated better that you were still alive, but you get up 15 seconds later, like, I'm on to the next thing.
I think it's
where it's 10 minutes later in a Hollywood movie, and that's unforgivable.
Yeah. I think again it comes to it's the consistency of doing these things, but also like I think part of it is the performance that goes with it. And as you said, I think sometimes it's so rushed. It's the end of this film is another, like the teacher guy. Let's give you an example. Like they shoot him and all this other stuff, and then his phone goes off, and he gets up to talk to his daughter for one last time. And it's played almost like a parody, like almost like a comedy. Like it's funny, like it's a comedy moment where it's a
Tarantino little scene,
yeah. But he's almost the way he gets up and he walks over to the sofa in sort of like in wrestling terms. It's a no sell. Like he gets up and just walks over. Like at no point is he limping or anything else. And then he sits and dies. And it's funny, and I like it that he's sort of like, because obviously they've had to wake him up a few times to answer the call. So I like that it's a callback to stuff that's happened in the film. And the kids are all just sat there looking at him like, "What are you doing? We don't.
How is this guy alive?
Yeah, what is happening right now?" But again, it's the performance doesn't always sort of fit what's happening. And that's sort of like what bothers me. And again, but I think it's that thing of
the
like
performance of the kids' reactions or of the teacher.
The teacher at that point, the way he just sort of sits up and stands up. I like the teacher in the rest of the film. I think he's great. If a little,
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
And so there's that thing of inconsistency in performance or in direction given for those sequences. which is
Yeah. I mean,
of,
I assume he's in
stumble
shock
on.
and isn't aware, that he's dying. But right, he should still have some physical sign that he's injured. But I mean, it's funnier that he doesn't, I guess. I don't know. I mean, but to me, it's like, that scene works for me. I think it's, I love the teacher.
Oh, he's excellent.
I love the whole arc of him. I mean, this whole being stabbed in school, it's this vicious attack. And, I mean, this is this whole other layer of like the kids are out of control. And, I mean, I know I have friends who are public school teachers who deal with kids who are, stoned and threaten them and, mouth off and whatnot. And, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot in here thematically.
No, there is. I mean, because it's interesting because this is a bit of a, I don't know, a corporal punishment wet dream, isn't it? Because the liberal teacher that they have is shot and killed at the beginning of the film. And so it's down to sort of punishment time. And I understand. I mean, the guy had a knife run over the back of his leg. I mean, it's pretty severe. Explain to me one thing though about the teacher. Let's talk about the teacher.
Not sure that I can.
What the hell is his relationship with Nakagawa?
I think they've had a sexual relationship or some sort of inappropriate relationship.
Right. Because that's what I sort of took, but I was like, I don't get, am I missing something? Because she dreams about him and they're sharing ice cream and it's all very nice. He appears to have painted a picture of her with everybody else dying, but her in the middle not.
And he wants her to survive, and he intervenes and saves her at one point.
Yes, he gives her the umbrella and all that sort of stuff. I was a bit confused by his relationship with her. And again, I was wondering if is it more explicit in the manga or the novel or anything.
Yeah, I think so, but I don't remember all that well. I think that one thing that I like about this and don't like, I mean, like I've said, like I think it's best attribute and worst attribute of this runtime, right?
Yeah,
and like that is an intriguing story. It's potentially troubling in the era of Me Too, but
I think it's troubling pre-Me Too as well, to be honest.
Well, I mean, it wasn't supposed to not be troubling in this movie, right? It's not like it's presented as, a fun perk of the job or something, he's not a great guy. And, this is part of, he's also not even running the thing right because, he's biased and he's intervening to save this person who he's playing favorites. When you're selecting zones to become no-go areas, that makes a big difference. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, one of the things I like the most about this movie is the way it uses shorthand for these characters' pasts like that. And we've talked about that with some other characters, with the suicide, the kid's father, and here, I mean, this would be a very different movie if that were explained. Okay, so yeah, that's what I take.
Okay, no, that's fine. I didn't know if I was misreading it because I was like, there's clearly something here. There's a because even in the beginning of the film, like she ends up with the knife and hides it from him when the kid sort of cuts the back of his leg. And so I was like, okay, they've got a pass, but I don't know what it is, and it sort of suggests he's attracted to her, but then she has to dream about him. So I was like, oh, there's something here. Am I reading into this something that's not there? So I'm glad you've said the same thing as me because I was like, there's clearly something there. That's fine. Okay. But he's good. I like him. He's a fun character, like in the sense of like, again, it's that thing in the film, and I'm probably not supposed to ask these questions, but it's funny how like a teacher seems to be running a military unit and they all report to him.
Yeah, that's true.
But
it works. I mean,
it works.
And I think I mean, and he's one of the standout actors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I think a lot of those shorthands, there's also, I mean, the one with the scythe has, the flashback to basically like her mother is a prostitute, probably, and a drunk. and she winds up killing one of the Johns, pushing him down the stairs. Totally realistic thing that could happen. And and you're right, this is a sort of hard Scrabble past, right? You could see how that would encourage somebody to become a sociopath. There's also a girl who's trapped in a bathroom stall, as she's bullied. So this plays into so many, not just trauma of, your parents dying and are the kids out of control, but also, the callousness of society. And some would say Japanese society in particular.
Well, that's actually a good question, because one of the things, we've covered off satire in the past, in particular, sort of, let's say, Starship Troopers. And that's obviously a satire of Western militarization, in particular, sort of American, but you could sort of lobby it at many other countries as well. This feels like a satire of an element of Japanese culture. Now, I will admit, I'm not hugely educated on Japanese culture. I've watched manga and so I've watched anime and read some manga, but I don't know the whole ins and outs of their politics and all this other stuff. This thing of the kids in particular, this idea of the whole thing in particular, the Battle Royale act, and this whole thing of fear of youth and them running amok or them being out of control. This feels like it's making a statement about, so especially, it's obviously, I don't know which came first, the film, the book, or the manga.
The novel came first.
Oh, the novel came first. It very much feels like this is making a statement about some element of Japanese culture, and I wonder about its impact and its influence and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if you, from reading the others, does it have? I'm just curious, because it feels very much like he's making a statement about, and I don't know anything about kids, Japanese kids culture other than a little bit of gaming and sort of that anime and manga stuff, really. But it feels like it should be important to know something like this. I feel like I'm missing part of the point of this film by not knowing an element of that culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I would say that, like, over and over again, I know that the novel took is a sort of fascist state, but I know that over and over again, when especially Japanese and to a lesser degree Asian stuff that is seen as exploitative. I think this is true in the West too. You find out, it couldn't be anything but, right? This was written to express a deep frustration with things. I mean, Japan is a very conformist, traditionalist society, and is to this day. And at the same time, there are, concerns. I mean, I'm not an expert, but at the same time, there are concerns about, has Japan gone too far? There's a whole thing going on right now of, older women divorcing husbands. And the fact that, these women in their 70s are like, I can take half his money. He's always been a dick to me. We've raised our kids, they're out of the house. Why would I want to spend my final years with this person? That has shocked, Japan, where it's like, men are you're going to have to behave better because you don't want to die alone. But I mean, other people would say, this is, these women should shut up and be wives, that the family structure in traditional Japanese society depends on it. So, I mean, and that, that is more of an acceptable attitude, there than here. So I think that there is constantly a tension in Japan between the past and tradition and, a sense of things being out of control, And I think that's probably been true that was true, before the emperor. I mean, it was true, before the emperor was, styled as a Western style dictator, leading up to World War II. I mean, the white ships and, the Dutch, I mean, the world was changing really fast then too.
Yeah.
And people cried, the sky is falling.
Because that's what this feels like. That phrase there, "the sky's falling." This feels like a reactionary step to something that in that sort of like the sky is falling because the kids are revolting or the kids are out of control. And that non-conformist is something I am aware of because I mean they're a very odd. Odd is not the word. All cultures have their oddities. All cultures have their eccentricities, let's say. And you're right. And there's this very sort of like conformist nature of Japanese culture, but it can be considered very misogynist, can't it? It's very sort of male centric. And there is that sort of girlification of women to sort of be, and I felt that with this because I find the school uniforms are, the boys wear suits for all intents and purposes. Like it's a tan trousers and blazers and shirt and tie. Like it's a very but the girls have got like the skirts of that pleated skirt with frilly skirts underneath and all this other stuff. It feels very, you can tell, not sexualized, but there's almost like a very sort of different standard for the boys and the girls. And
it's almost like Star Trek.
With the short skirts, exactly. It's exactly that, yeah.
But I mean, like those are kind of the uniforms, right? I mean, those are the uniforms in Japan. They're the uniforms in Korea. At least as of a few years ago. I mean, there are schools down the block where if the school's letting out and you're on the bus, when the school's letting out, the school's flooded with people in those same uniforms.
Yeah,
today.
Yeah. So it's an interesting sort of thing of that. I don't know the point I'm making, but it feels like I'm missing something from the culture. Do you know what I mean? Like my education of, if I was better educated on Japanese culture and sort of social history, I think I would be able to take more from this film than I do.
Okay. I don't know that that's true. I mean, I think that those differences, there are differences. There are things that don't bother me, in Japanese performances, because of the way that Japanese culture and Japanese people in general, obviously there's a huge generalization, can be and are taught to be indirect, right? As part of that, conformity, part of that politeness, even under unbelievable circumstances. That has an effect of sort of me pardoning a lot of Japanese performances in Japanese film, in ways that maybe a Japanese person wouldn't. So I worry about that. But I think I don't know if you like, one of my favorite films is the original Old Boy. This Korean. And, this has some of that same quality of like the trauma of high school.
Yeah.
And that sort of cauldron of high school. And now the thing is, same is true here. People are bullied. The difference is like Starship Troopers, as good as it is, Starship Troopers is a parody of high school movies. Like
yes.
It's a parody of 90210, right? Of those tropes. This is more a satirizing the actual pain and suffering of high school, right? Like it's less. There are tropes, right? There are the the slut, quote unquote, and things like this. But I mean, those, when I see those images, I feel something in a way that, like, when I see the high school elements of Starship Troopers, now they're older actors, I think I'm watching something that's carefully staged to represent other movies.
Yeah.
And here it's a lot more emotionally affecting for me. And there is something about sort of being haunted by our school days that comes up in Old Boy and in this, including that haunting picture at the end.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would say that thing, this did make me think of secondary school or high school. Like, as I said, there's some of those relationships that the unspoken and feelings, or the jealousies and the conflicts and all that sort of thing. Yeah, all that, like I said, resonated with me, and I do think there is some of those sort of little outbursts really sort of do hit home. And I do think that's sort of where it becomes, like you say, quite haunting. And sort of carries a weight that when it does, that's what I'm saying, those bursts of violence, as I say, sort of carry weight for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, shit, like, there were those people that I know for a fact, if they took my class from 1996 and dropped us on an island, yeah, there'd be people that would be coming for my chubby white ass very, very quickly, that just did not like me. And I've often thought about this, going, I've thought back in my days, and I'm very, as you get older, you get more comfortable. I'm pretty comfortable now. There are people that don't like me. Like, you can't please everybody. There are people that are going to dislike what you do, and so on and so forth. Fine. But I remember being in secondary school and people just not liking me, and like me going, like, I've no idea what I've done or why. Like, I've barely crossed paths with these people, but for some reason, I've become like a sore point for them, and I don't know why. And so there was parts of this film in a similar way where you're like, yeah, I get why there are certain relationships that you would be like, no, I'm not teaming with you. This may be life and death, but I hate you to such a degree that I would rather put my life at risk than team up with you, like, than trust you. And as a teenager, you sort of have those heightened, hormone infused emotions that I think you don't make the best decisions. As when you're older and a bit more an adult, you probably would be a bit more willing to make. So no, I agree with that there's a rawness to this that I think is important. So
I want to go back to this high school thing, but I want to make a relate it to differences between Japanese and American or British society. One thing, I do think that conformity is different, right? I have had friends who, have taught in Japan, and seen the way, the students, I mean, the irony is, like, this is a movie about kids out of control. Today, the students all stop class and clean the classroom. Like, that is something that happens in every, like, can you imagine white kids in America or Britain being told, like, okay, you're not going to be educated for the next 30 minutes. We're all going to pitch together and do what the custodian's doing. Like,
well, that happened at the World Cup. Did you see that? Did you see the stories that came out of the World Cup? So, out of Qatar, like, Japan did pretty well in the last World Cup, and whenever the Japanese fans finish at the stadium, so you'd see all these, like, European or South American or whatever fans, and they basically sort of wreck the place, and everyone's covered in flags and litter and all sort of stuff. Absolutely awful, but the Japanese fans literally picked up all their rubbish and tidied up and left with it, and people were like, that's a culture we can get behind. Like, that's
a superior civilization, frankly.
Yeah.
I know I'm not supposed to say that, but there were things that I'm proud of as a Westerner. But come on, white people are dirty and we are rude, and we are trained to be dirty and rude. And if I'm in a restaurant and I'm like, can't those people quiet it down? Don't they know there are other people around? Guess what? They're usually white. There's stuff I'm proud of, whatever. There are differences, but obviously individual variety. There are loud Japanese people and quiet people, okay? But no, yes, that's very true. About cleaning up, just like, just seeing people litter, just seeing, yeah, I want this. You're at a restaurant. You're not this person's boss, and they're the worst abused secretary ever. Like, this isn't your opportunity for class vengeance because you're at Applebee's, okay? And who does that? Okay, that's not a Japanese thing. Now it can happen, right? But it's hard to imagine, that happening in an Applebee's. So there is this kind of, like, conformity and hours where you're allowed to eat this or that in public, and things like this. But strike us to my mentality is like, my God. Okay, but then there are these things that I think are universal, and I think this sort of, like, high school as a social cauldron of who's screwing who, and the cruelty of kids to each other is absolute. And every country thinks that it's unique to them and has their own peculiarities. So like Japan a while back, there was maybe 15 years ago, there was a sort of a series of articles and concerns that high school teenage girls were going out and prostituting themselves to older men in order to afford the new technology and stuff, and all the new. So it was like this kind of like, have we gone too far with capitalism, with the new technology, and how expensive it is, and then that played into also like, do we have this declining moral state? Are the kids all right? Kind of fear and paranoia. I guarantee you that those rates of girls prostituting themselves in high school is not significantly higher in Japan than it is where I live, but there is a very Japanese way that story played out and caught fire at that moment. It's a very Japanese fear, but actually what's underneath it is universal, right?
Yes.
Like the kids are not all right. They're too sexy, or they're not sexy enough, or they're or they're cruel. And I think all kids are cruel. We can try to be nice. There are kids who try to be nice, but I mean, there is this way in which I see Battle Royale as like this kind of cauldron in which all of those sort of Lord of the Flies, all of those sort of high school things come out.
Yeah.
And it reveals your true character in a way that
Lord of the Flies is a really good touch point for this. I hadn't thought about. And you saying obviously this is the one that solidified it. Lord of the Flies feels a little bit like like a starting point. Like if you were to do it, if you were to sort of track this backwards in Lord of the Flies, the novel and the film versions, would definitely be a touch point for this. It's kids, kids trapped on an island, and how they sort of, this idea that they return to some sort of like animalistic state, like they, is it the kid with the glasses, the chubby kid with the glasses, Piggy, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, it's a really good point of like, kids are cruel. I mean, we've covered it before. It sounds daft, but even I was thinking about this, and we'll talk about it off air at some point, but like the childhood traumas of Red Dwarf, of both Rimmer and Lister. Rimmers are all at school. Like that poor sod was bullied and ridiculed and ripped and everything. And you think, yeah, that's what it became. Like he became this bag of neuroses because of that thing. And I like that this film does have that. I really like that it feels so raw. For example, just to bring it back to this point, is the opening death, or the first one you really see, is, and I'm going to say it, I can't remember the characters because I was a bit like, even at this point, I was like, I'm not going to try. I'm just going to enjoy it for now.
This is a knife to the head. No,
this is the girl with the bow, the arrow through her neck.
Oh, because the teacher has already killed a couple people.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's all right. Kid on kid. Let me call it kid on kid death. Because the
teacher in the news here all the time. That kid on kid violence.
But the kid, like you see her walk along, and she's got this arrow through her throat, like through her neck, and you're like, oh my god, is it one of the mean kids or one of the cruel kids? No, it's clearly one of the bullied kids. Like it's one of the chubby kids. He's bullied, and he's just gone like, I'm going to survive this in whatever way I need to, and I'm going to kill anyone I have to survive. And it feels like a real reaction of like, but he's not angry. He's not like relishing that of like, yes, I'm getting. He's more terrified of just like, I've got to do what it was a shock reaction. And so I again, like straight away, you're like, oh, this isn't going to be, the Western film where, the Revenge of the Nerds or whatever. Like this is going to be messy. So it's sort of, I think it gives you that straight away from the kid on kid action.
Yeah, I like that. And the other thing I'd point out about that is that I think this is more true in the novel and the manga, is a sense of but you do see it in this is the sense of strategy. The different characters are pursuing their different survival strategies. They have different weapons. I mean, you do see some traps, in this, to sort of alert a character. But it's a big deal in the novel and the manga that certain people, when they leave, hang around the building to pick off other people as they leave, right?
Right.
So like the way you leave that building is really important to your survival. And that kid is doing exactly that. He's, decided to pick off somebody, who's leaving, and picks on a girl, somebody who's weaker than him.
Yeah, and that's what I mean.
It's passing the shit runs downhill, right?
Oh, exactly. I totally feel that. Like, that's it. He's looking for someone weaker than him to sort of see if he can, or like I said, there's a bottleneck there. They're having to come out of a doorway, so he's got like a kill zone, if you will. This is what I'm saying. That this film does strike home. I think this is where, and again, the themes of this film and the way that this film is set up in several ways really works. And I think the sort of, as I said, those sort of like those bursts of emotionally sort of supported violence that are shocking, and some other bits really work. However, I still stand by the fact that I think some of the performances and the cinematography, I think maybe it is the budget, but then there are other scenes that I think are shot incredibly well and look fantastic. The inconsistency, I still struggle with this film, and I am standing by the fact that I think, give this, as I said, what you say, 23 years. All right, maybe give it a couple more years. This film could benefit from a remake. And you said about HBO Max. I'd rather them go like the Netflix Squid Games route. Don't Hollywoodize it. Don't Hollywoodize this. Don't have an American make this. Keep it Japanese. Keep it done by those people or whatever. Just give them 8 episodes and a bunch of money to do it, and you can expand on it. And I think you could do something much more impactful, maybe.
Well, and the Squid Game creators acknowledged this as an influence. To their credit.
I can say, I can't see how they could not, but yeah.
I'm upset about like video games like Avengers Arena, Fortnite. I mean, like Fortnite straight up plops you on an island where you're given, you have to hunt down weapons in the environment, and there's a no-go area that is closing in on the center of the island. Like, that's this movie, right? Straight up, and that's, what does that make? $1 billion? I mean,
I'm sure there is people that have started to watch this thinking they are going to be watching something akin to Fortnite, and then be going like, what the hell is going on?
But you talked about the remake, and I've often thought about it, is it doesn't seem possible. And one of the reasons why this was so controversial is because it's 15-year-old actors. Right? And that's what makes it work in part for me, right? I mean, you're watching 15-year-old kids, one of the scenes I remember the most is that machine gun ripping through that girl as she's speaking into the microphone,
on the hill. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just, there's time and time again, you watch this and I am moved by shot after shot, by death after death, by, watching suicides even, and just going like, oh yeah, like the Western version of this doesn't have any suicides,
No.
But that's part of why this will never, and they've said like, this will never get remade. It's because it's too controversial. This movie has been banned, in multiple countries. It was banned in Germany in like 2013 or some shit. Like this continues to be a controversial movie. And I certainly don't want some sanitized, like you're saying, Hollywood thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right about being banned. I mean, this wasn't released in the UK in 2000. I don't even think it was released until
or the US.
Yeah, I don't think this was released until like 2010, those early 2010s. Because I remember it being released was a bit of a big deal. There's been like a big special edition that's been released in the last sort of year or so that's got Battle Royale and Battle Royale 2 in it, by a distributor over here now. And I think once it was released, and I think we've moved on, I do think it sort of gets that sort of like cult treatment, of sort of like it still stands up the time. I think the other thing that this would suffer from, if it were to be a remake, I agree with what you're saying about the sanitized version. I think certain channels or certain production companies wouldn't sanitize it. Is it HBO Max or some of the others? However, I think this may suffer the John Carter effect.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing they've talked about. Just like post-Hunger Games, the West will think this is a ripoff of Hunger Games.
Exactly. And I think that's, we said that about John Carter, that it's such a sort of like, take of like Star Wars and so many things that, if this was to be re-released, they'd be like, oh, where's Katniss kind of thing. And you'd be like, no. Like, Katniss wouldn't survive this shit. Like she'd have been torn to pieces. And so I think that's the problem as well, that there's been so many imitators that I do think, if it was to be re-released, you almost need it to be taken as the Squid Games is almost its descendant, isn't it? Of in that way of like, oh, we can't remake Battle Royale, but we can do it with a twist, and so we're going to do it in this way.
Right, and and Korean, right?
Yeah.
So like it's informed by a different cultural milieu. Which in both cases of that and this, I think are unique to that culture while also being shockingly universal. I mean, there's nothing in this that I don't find, unintelligible. If anything, like this narrative of like the kids aren't all right, like they're violent, they're mean. I caught myself saying this earlier, right? And talking about this, and it occurred to me, oh shit, right? Like I live in the land of school shootings where like the rest of the world says, oh, you went to high school in America? Did you ever have a shooting at your school? Because that's the one thing, about high schools in America is literally kids murdering other kids, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a national pastime. Battle Royale is like, if you did this in America, it would be like, that's a commentary on school shootings.
Yeah, I think, and maybe that is a version that gets done in some way that they, you'd have to have
that. You can't touch that shit, man. It's like Shoot and Hellblazer, right? Like that, watch that shit you cannot. No, I mean there was like a video game somebody made, just like an indie video game where you took the part of a school shooter. Oh no, anyone who touches that shit.
Well, there was one called
You can distribute the F-16s to kids.
Yeah.
And you'll get money for it from Republicans. But God forbid you make a video game.
There was a video game called Postal, which was very much that, in which you played a disgruntled postal worker that goes on the rampage. So, yeah. I see what you mean in the like,
but again, that's like the cultural hypocrisy, and so many of the Japanese filmmakers that I love the most, like Science Sono, and I love this film, are movies that are vicious toward Japanese society, that come from a place of contempt or even hatred for this conformity and this repression and this cruelty. And then I think, part of why I sympathize so much with it is because that's exactly what I feel about here. And our high schools and what we're doing here. So I relate to it very strongly as an American, ironically.
Yeah. No, again, we have it here. Like you said, it's universal. Like, we're not free of it in the slightest. I think, yes, we don't have the school shootings, but it's a bit of a talking point they go to is knife crime, and we're aware of that. But like, we don't need knives or guns. Like, kids just getting a good old fashioned beating on the school gates, or even that element of like cyberbullying or straight up bullying that drives kids to suicide and that sort of thing. Like, it's a bit of an epidemic over here. That's what we've had it where even there are schools in there's a school in a relatively well-to-do town near where I live where a kid did commit suicide eventually because he was bullied to that extent. And it was a big deal. So it is a universal, that sort of, you refer to it as a melting pot earlier on.
Oh, social cauldron kind of.
Yeah, like a social cauldron. But I do think that thing of high school in particular, that age, is a fascinating thing to sort of like, and I think it's why there's so many films and stuff been made about this era in people's lives, this high school era, because it's you know, you're trying to sort of understand who you are. You've sort of like your hormones are still racing. You're not really sure how to work in the world. You've got a lot of pressure on your shoulders. You know, you're still being told you've got to decide what you're going to be in the future. You've got all these exams to do, go make money, go do this, go do that. It's a tough time being a kid in your teens. And, you know, we sort of joke about it, but yeah, if you make it through and you're as a well-adjusted and rounded person, well done, because 99% don't, I think, is the... So yeah, no, it's interesting. Anyway, I think we are sort of getting to a point of I think we've battled it out, and
yeah, I mean, as a closing thought, I mean, I love this movie. I think it's a masterpiece. I would go that far, and I think that for me, it's not perfect by any means. I acknowledge there are these problems with shots and whatnot. I think that it manages to be like salacious and entertaining to such a ridiculous degree. Like just 9 out of 10. I'm bored watching, $500 million movies, and I'm not bored by, a minute of this. It's just such a entertaining idea, right? And I was thinking about like The Most Dangerous Game, and what it says in terms of like power dynamics of our societies, but also speaking to a deep desire within us to hunt and to kill and to be hunted and to be killed. And I watch this movie and I think, oh man, I wish I were there. I wish I were playing this game. And I know I'd probably be killed, right? I know like the odds would be against me, but I want to be there and to be able to make these choices. And perhaps that's why these video games do so well, because they put us there, and I'm a huge fan of like Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that, even more so. But we like vicariously to experience this violence and this entertainment. That's why violent movies are successful. It's not because of anything else. Violence is entertaining to us. And our mammalian brains are entertained by it and want to vicariously experience it. At the same time, go ahead.
No, because that's a point. I actually want to expand on that point, because you make a really good point there. All of the other film versions I watched of this, it's broadcast, and that's part of the point. So in The Condemned, with Steve Austin, it's about it being broadcast on the internet for money and people enjoying the violence and the snuff element of it. In The Hunger Games, it's broadcast to all the districts and stuff as a form of control and fear, because you're then backing the people from your district, but it's also showing the power of the capital. So in many other, as we talked about with The Running Man, it being a form of entertainment, like the point is you are living to bet and gamble on the survival of these people. It's often a moment, but I think it's an interesting point of one of those, it's a cul-de-sac that I think those films can't answer. Especially The Condemned does it, and I think The Running Man sort of struggles with it as well, even though it's a satire. This idea about making a film in which you are saying that people are bad for watching violence on screen, and you're like, well, I'm confused by both the messaging and the film that I'm now watching. So they want to present that message as to say, well, this is awful, this is bad, and we shouldn't watch it. But one of the interesting things about Battle Royale is it's not being broadcast. It's not being. You say about being salacious. The film is in itself, but the matter that is being dealt on these films, like it's not like the death of these kids is being broadcast to a Japanese audience back home. So it's not actually trying to make a salacious point about the people.
Yeah, and I don't know about that. I mean, I think that maybe it would be better if it were, but I mean, then it evokes other stuff. I mean, we both like that chopper sequence with the the younger girl who's smiling, covered in blood, and there is kind of like at the end of this, there's some kind of public announcement of who the winner is, and exactly how that's handled isn't done super well in this. But yeah, I mean, and I do think there are movies. One of my favorite movies is Natural Born Killers, that indulges in the fun of violence while also criticizing you and the media for indulging in that, and acknowledging that. And I think that whether it's a serial killer movie or, I mean, like, there's all this controversy about, the Netflix show Dahmer, right? Of like, is it exploiting Dahmer? And like, this was so terrible. There's something about Dahmer that pushes people's buttons. But we've had a million serial killer things like that. And, people can get triggered or not, but I mean, this is not a new thing. And so I think this dynamic is really key. I think it's key to entertainment, but we also want like a kind of moral catharsis, right?
Yeah.
We want to be able to say, I wouldn't do that, or the good guy won. And I think that Hollywood usually gives us that, right? The good guys escape and they win, and they're the all-American boys and girls, and yada, yada, yada. This actually does more of that than I'm comfortable with, but, and as does the novel and the manga. But I think that, where this excels is, especially I think the film, is this kind of like rapid pace where it manages to be like a 9 out of 10 in terms of entertainment. But it also manages to evoke all of these feelings about bullying and violence and, the way we treat each other, and even, school kids, how society seems fine with this kind of thing. The whole thing about teaching and the meaninglessness of the teacher's life. And it feels very evocative. It feels, the stupidity of those girls killing each other in the lighthouse, where it's just like, we could trust each other and achieve a better end, but we're trapped in this kind of, capitalist, cruel cycle. Maybe it's just in our brains. And all of this feels, I mean, not telling somebody you love them and then dying, it does feel like it touches on all these things and becomes more than the sum of its parts. But none of those things are belabored, right? They're not like, oh, okay, here's that theme again, right? Like, so for me, it works on those levels too. Maybe not as much as it is entertaining, but pretty close.
Okay, no, I see what you're saying, and I do. No, I respect that. I do. I think I as I sat through this film, as I said, there are points where I'm like, this is really good. Like, this is a stand-up moment, whether it be visual or an idea or whatever. And actually, the whole, as in the grand theme of the grand idea, I understand its place in history as in cinema history. And it works. In general, I think it works. Like, I can watch this film. It's just about 2 hours long or thereabouts. I could watch this film, like I say, just sit back and watch it as entertainment and enjoy the killing. I said before about the use of dye. We said about the use of dye or paint as sort of like blood splatter. That doesn't really bother me in the slightest, because it still gives a pretty good depiction of what it needs to be. And in some cases, I think the bursts of violence are done incredibly well and with meaning that carries weight. And I think when it's those moments, like this film is working tops. You've said about the highs and the lows. Those highs in this film, those spikes where it sort of you go, oh, this film just hit me, like really hit me. Unfortunately, then it's then got lows where, and I think this is you said about the young actors and stuff. I think it shows where I'm just like, oh, that scene that you've just done, this is now taking me out of this experience where I'm just going like, they don't know where they're supposed to be in the scene. They can't react. They're chopping up the dialogue. It all seems very stagey and all this other stuff. Sort of takes me out of it, unfortunately. And I feel that scene of the girls having lunch in that sort of that area is very much of that, where I think the violence of it and that thing about the paranoia is great. The idea there, but the performances are so sort of poor in some cases that it just doesn't work, but others do. So overall, I could sit through this film again and I could enjoy it and go, yeah, it's good fun. It's fine. However, these people that keep claiming like I say, like this is a sort of a cinema classic. This is cinema, and I'm going like, yeah, I feel this like this with Reservoir Dogs, and this is probably a thing. Like I've watched Reservoir Dogs a number of times, and I go, it's good. I get what it's doing. It's clearly not Tarantino's best film. It's a statement of intent more than anything. But then people go, no, this is cinema. And I'm going like, no, it's not. It's a low budget indie film that's a bit mean. And I sort of feel about this. That's what I sometimes feel about this. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do, but I mean, I would agree with you about Reservoir Dogs and not about this.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I find myself maybe I'm more forgiving because it's Japanese.
That part's fine. And again, I think, and I get, but sometimes I think there's a part of me I need to put on myself. I honestly do think if maybe I'd experienced the manga or the novel, or I had some additional knowledge, I'm like, I like to look at things in the context of where they were being made, and I don't have that knowledge. So I think I do feel like I'm missing out a chunk of the reasoning. That I agree with the universality of the high school experience and how shitty that could really be, and so I appreciate that. And I will say, having a daughter that's going to be going into secondary school in a couple of years, like, it plays on my mind a lot. Like, yeah, or I'm like, yeah, that's homeschooling. It is.
Well, they still got the internet.
That's true. Yeah,
it's terrifying.
Yeah,
right.
It is, and this film does bring it home. That thing of sort of like and we say about Me Too, and I know very much this whole thing of like boys should not be raised to think that sort of they have a right to women or girls, and it shows in this film. There's several instances where a boy will be like, I love you, and it's almost like a grand statement, or he turns up with a crossbow and he's like, no, you're mine. And there's that, I don't want to say boys will be boys, and not in a positive way, because having been a teenage boy, I also know that like we're an obnoxious bunch of little hormone-driven monsters. And so that whole thing does play out really well. But I don't know. I just think if this was a bit more polished, and maybe if they sort of had a couple of scenes where they were like, right, can we just take that again, but less arm movement and less sort of like, theatre dramatics, amateur dramatics would be good. But it's fine. It's not terrible by any stretch. But I wasn't taken in by it as much as I thought I would be, having remembered it. I also wanted to sort of finalise the point. I didn't watch it, but I checked out the trailer and some of the bits for the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got a very different feel to it.
Yeah, I've seen it and I don't remember it. I'd love to cover it sometime.
I think it's one for us. I do think it's one for us to go, because it's such a different feel. I was a bit like, oh, this is a very different approach. So I'd be interested to see how it stands up next to it.
Well, maybe we'll do it on Patreon.
That's what we should do. Any other final thoughts?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing that I sort of finding myself thinking is how so many of the things that I love the most are things that have these ups and downs, that have sort of edges that, are maybe 10 degrees off of, a 10 out of 10. And I don't think anything's a 10 out of 10. But, these things that I really, really love are sort of like 10 degrees off. I acknowledge that they're off, that they're not consistent in certain ways. But in the same way, like I can forgive parts of Valerian that you and most people can't, because like those highs are just like, oh no, this is a masterpiece. I love this stuff. It's just interesting to me how our brains function as critics and receptors for art.
Yeah, I do think a big part of it, and I acknowledge it is my own hang-up, is that I've been spoiled on Western narratives and Western tropes, where I go into many of these things. Again, having watched The Hunger Games and going, Katniss, she's the main protagonist. I know she's not going to die, but I get to follow her story. Do you know what I mean? That you have that, and I think it's the same with like the Condemned. Oh, Stone Cold Steve Austin, yeah, he's the star. I'm going to follow him. It makes sense. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I think that's a Western trope. So sometimes I like the randomness in other films, and I think we'll see it in some that we've got coming up. And sometimes it doesn't work for me. So I think that's partly on me, and I accept that.
If I could say real briefly, like I have the exact opposite reaction. And when I see like, okay, that's the famous actor or actress, and then I'm like, right, they just jumped off a building. They're dead. This movie is a pile of crap, and I hate it. Nothing it could ever do could possibly redeem that in my eyes, because I knew from the beginning this person was not under any threat, and they still were like ambushed by somebody with a machine gun, and they survived while other people didn't. And I'm just like, right, you survived because you were on the marquee. There's nothing about that performance, even if that is a better performance by a better actor, that convinces me that that's why they would survive. And to me, it's just like, I feel the hands of God, like the writer and the director playing with this universe to make this character survive. And that just instantly takes me out of the narrative, and I will never be able to take that movie serious.
So our between season bonus series is going to be The Hunger Games and a Jennifer Lawrence special.
Secret? I've never seen any of them.
Oh, really?
Never.
I'm not going to suggest you do go see them. That I watched them, and I'm sort of glad I did. And just as a side piece, like I like, they are darker than I remembered, and they do explore themes that I like. However, they are massively flawed in places. They're good fun, but massively flawed. There you go. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. That is our Battle Royale. And I think we were doing a Battle Royale with cheese, if we're going to keep the Tarantino comparisons. But yes, we will be moving on from this. We're going back to Western cinema and a bit of a mishmash of British and American next. We are going to be covering Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the movie version. But we're not going to be doing that alone. There is much to do. We have been talking, and we might do it. We'll have to see. We will let you know, because obviously that wasn't the first adaptation of the Douglas Adams story. There was the BBC TV adaptation that came out in the 80s. And
1981.
1981, the year I was born. There you go.
Wow.
And so, yes, we will be.
You're not a high school kid now?
Yeah, I don't feel it.
You're just a wee one compared to me.
Yeah, my knees do not feel it, I guarantee you. But you and I have been discussing this potential of doing some of these side pieces on Patreon. As you said, Battle Royale 2 might be worth just doing as an hour-long episode, and the same for the original adaptation, the BBC
which
version.
We both love. We both
do. Yeah. To preempt it, I do really enjoy, and I've watched it several times. That BBC version is very good. But do we love the 2005, I believe, 2005 adaptation with Martin Freeman? We shall see what we think of. So, if you do like what we do, please leave a review. It greatly helps us get up those ranks, gets more people to see us. I think it's important, but we appreciate all feedback. And if you really like what we do, and you do like the idea of us doing our little side pieces, let us know, and check out our Patreon, because it helps keep the lights on at it stops our
20th Century Geek Plaza.
20th Century
taken
Towers
over from Nagatomi, and it's been renamed.
That's right, yes, and it keeps our alien overlords at bay and keeps us in DVDs and Blu-rays. But But yes, please go check out our Patreon.
Battle Royale is Tiller and Lem's plan for the species,
Yes, it is. Yeah, both. What you don't realize is that both Julian and I are in training, and we are ready for the Hunger Games, wherever they shall be held. So yes, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for all your support and all your engagement, and hope you enjoyed this episode, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.